Hello and welcome everyone to the 400th video for this chess channel. And today I will be covering why chess endgames are important. And I'll do that by going over a game that was played yesterday between me and another member of the local chess club. And I had the black pieces in this game, and it's pretty instructive. So my opponent, he was a lower rated player, but he played a solid performance of 80.8% accuracy. It looks like I ended up playing 91.5. But if we look at the inaccuracies, we both had 3 inaccuracies. He had 2 mistakes and I had 1, but I also had 1 miss. And then he had 1 blunder in the game. But we'll take a look at this and see why endgames in chess are important. So if I look at the analysis here, the game began with my opponent playing e4 and I responded with e5. Knight to f3, attacking my pawn on e5, and so I defend with the knight. And my opponent plays bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez here. So I play a6 to attack this bishop, and he retreats. So here I just develop the other knight, attacking his pawn, but he ignores that and just castles. So instead of taking his pawn, I just continue with this attack on his bishop. And so I'm still learning this opening repertoire. It looks like I probably should have played bishop to e7 instead. So if we go back 1 move and take a look, it looks like they're both about equal. Now it's saying b5 is, preferred slightly over bishop to e7, but bishop to e7 would help me get castled more quickly. But instead I chased his bishop, and he retreats here to b3, and so now this is a good line, aiming through the center here and attacking my f pawn. So now I go ahead and develop the bishop on this move anyway. That way, I don't want any surprises of a knight and bishop piling up on this f-pawn. Now I can just castle. So the game continued with d4 by my opponent, which is the #1 move in this position. And we're still all in book moves. That's why the Ruy Lopez, there's a lot of theory in this. So, you'll probably have to do a little bit of studying if you want to, play better in the Ruy Lopez, unless you pick a sideline where you don't have to do as much studying and learn as much theory. So I respond here with d6, which was the best move, and that helps protect and cover my pawn on e5. So moving on, we have capture, the best move in the position, and then I recapture, which is best. But now my opponent, he's able to start trading off material. So he captures my queen, and then here I have to be careful what I recapture with. So if I try to capture with my king, then the bishop would pick off this f-pawn possibly. So I play bishop captures, which is best. And now looks like the computer wants a4 here immediately, saying that is the best move to start an attack here on the queen side. But my opponent plays bishop to g5, which is also a good move, attacking my knight here. And I just respond by castling. And so the game continues with the knight being developed And that's an excellent move, but once again, the computer really wants this a4 move, attacking with the pawn. In the game, we have this inaccuracy here. So I play h6, which, this was probably a waste of time. Because my opponent, he was probably planning to trade off more material anyway. And so now I just end up playing this pawn move, which doesn't do much other than maybe keep the knight out of the position. But if we go back, it looks like the best move here would be bishop to g4, which would have just developed my bishop. Instead, in the game, we end up trading off material, and my bishop is just sitting here anyway. And all I did was move a pawn forward. So, I could have played that a little bit better. Now, if we go back, all right, so let me go back a little bit further here. So after the knight jumps up to c3, and then even if we take a look at that, the computer, it says that the knight over here to d2 would have been a little bit better maybe. That way it could back up this knight if my bishop went up here and tried to attack it, which the computer recommended. All right, so knight is developed. I make an inaccuracy attacking the bishop, but my opponent decides to capture here, trade off more material. I capture with the bishop, which is best to prevent doubling my pawns. And so I'm guilty of this myself. I've developed, or excuse me, instead of developing pieces, I've tried to just trade down material, especially if you're playing a higher rated opponent. And sometimes you trade unnecessarily or trade too many pieces, and trying to get the pieces off the board, thinking that, well, the less pieces on the board, the less that your higher rated opponent has to attack you with. But that can get you in trouble sometimes, especially if you're not sure about the end game. And that's another reason end games are so important. As you trade down into an end game, you really want to be sure that you're heading into an equal or winning end game and not a losing one. So we'll continue on here. The next move, let's see, after bishop captures, now bishop to d5 was played here, but the computer recommends instead knight to d5 as being best, because with this bishop move, this is an inaccuracy that puts the game slightly back in black's favor. So it looks like knight to d5 would have been better. Pushing this knight forward, now the c pawn is not blocked, and the bishop is backing up the knight, and you're attacking black's bishop as well. And then it looks like recommended is retreating the bishop to keep the bishop pair. But now look at this, both of my bishops are just here on the back row, and I don't even have my rooks developed. Now white doesn't either, but his minor pieces are developed better than mine are, and my bishops are just back here blocking my rooks as well. So white has a better position, and would have been ahead if the knight jumped forward first. But in the game, the bishop was moved up to d5, which does pin this knight to my rook. And here I was trying to decide if bishop to d7 or b7, which one would be better. And I thought, well, if I go to d7, there's a chance when the rooks start lining up on this open file that my bishop could be in trouble. So I played bishop to b7, but it says that's an inaccuracy. Now white is slightly in the lead, and I should have played bishop to d7 instead. And at this point, the computer recommends once again a4, attacking on the queen side with these pawns. So anyway, if I go back to what happened in the game, bishop to b7 to protect my knight, which is pinned to my rook. And then the game continued with the rooks starting to take control of the open D file. So I move here to protect my bishop so that I can move my knight if I have to, and the bishop will be protected. But it looks like just going ahead and moving to d8 would have been better to try and fight for control of this open file. But in the game, we have capture, so more exchanging down. I recapture, and now knight to d5, jumping forward, although the computer preferred b3 here. So that's interesting. Perhaps pushing forward there would get the this bishop off the line of this bishop. It would kind of, I don't know, allow a push of either the c pawn or the a pawn in the future. But in the game, knight to d5 is played, which is good, but the game is now slightly in black's favor again. So I play rook to c8 here to protect this pawn that was under attack by the knight. But it looks like I should have ignored that and just played. The computer recommends rook at b to d8, fighting for control of the open file. So if I would have played that, and let's see, now it recommends to just capture the bishop here and get rid of white's bishop pair, because if this were played, capturing, this would be a mistake because of bishop captures, then let's say rook captures, and then let's see, moving on, capture of the pawn, and then this pawn could be captured. So in this position, it shows that black is ahead by almost 2 pawns worth of material. Even though if we look at the material, we have 5 pawns to 5 pawns. So material's equal, but black does have the bishop pair here. And there's also, maybe a threat of attacking this knight and going after this pawn. But in the game, they recommended after rook to b8, if that was played, not for the knight to attack here, but to leave this, or excuse me, to take this knight and attack the bishop. So capture, and then of course I would have to recapture. So this is what the computer recommended, and it says at this point the game would be about even. Black would have wrecked his pawns here on the king side, so he'd have a weak isolated pawn here, and at this point it says the game is even. So after this capture, it looks like the rook moving to e1 to just protect this pawn is recommended. Make sure here. So after that, This is showing black is in the lead. So anyway, before I dig too deep into that, in the game, knight to d5 was played. And then I make a mistake here of just protecting this pawn, and now white is in the lead by almost half a pawn's worth of material. So the game continued with capture, getting rid of my bishop pair. So I recapture with the pawn, and then we have the other rook developing and protecting this e-pawn. So now I play rook to d8 here, trying to fight for control of this open file. And it says that's an excellent move. It kind of recommended the rook on the F file moving over, but they're about even. So now my opponent makes a blunder here, moving this knight to the edge of the board. So generally you don't want to do that, but I assume his goal was to jump that knight, reposition it here to f5, attacking this isolated pawn, blockading these doubled pawns. So that was probably the plan of jumping that knight on the edge and then moving in. But the computer says that rook to c1 would have been better to avoid trading the rooks. Because after this move, I played, let's see here, rook takes d1, and that is a miss. So black is still ahead after this capture, but it looks like an immediate, instead of that move, an immediate bishop capture would have been best, giving black even more of an advantage. So, of course, the rook cannot capture here, cannot capture the bishop, because then there would be a back rank mate of this capture of the rook on d1. And if we had something like this capture, well then after I capture, you still could not capture the bishop because of the back rank mate threat. So in the game, after the blunder move here, I didn't take full advantage of it, but I do grab a pawn by capturing, and then my opponent recaptures, and then I go after the pawn. So now I have this extra pawn, and my opponent plays rook to d2, which is best, protecting his c-pawn. And my king moves forward here, which I wanted to try and bring the king up into the action and get more involved, maybe jumping up here. Also, if I retreat back, I would have the option of either capturing with the... So if I retreat my bishop back and the knight captures, well then I would have the option of capturing either with the king or with the pawn. And also in the future my king could guard this f pawn and the h pawn. So if we go back and look at what I should have done, it looks like rook to b8 is what the computer prefers, or even rook to e8. But rook to b8 would possibly allow me to push my pawn forward, and it would be backed up by my rook. But in the game, my king moves forward, and then my opponent plays f3 here, chasing my bishop away. So in the game, I was trying to decide whether to move my bishop to the queen side or move it to the king side, and I decided to stay on the king side to keep this knight out. And it looks like I should have retreated all the way to h7. So let's see, this is the preferred move, to keep the bishop, and then this knight would be kind of stuck on the edge of the board here. But in the game, I did not do that. And instead, I played, let's see, bishop to g6. Because I felt, well, if he captures me, I can undouble my pawns. Or I could even capture with the king. So after he captures, I took a while to think about this. I thought, well, in the end game, I would have the extra pawn. And I was trying to figure out, well, should I go ahead and just capture with the king? But instead, I end up capturing, which appears to be the best move, capturing with the pawn. And my opponent decided to check. But in the game, it looks like h4 is preferred by the computer. But this rook check is an excellent move as well. And now here's where endgame study really comes in. So I block with the rook, which is the best move, which also protects this c pawn. And now the computer says that just retreating the rook to d5 would be the best move here. So general endgame strategy is that when you're behind in material, that you want to trade as many pawns as possible and avoid exchanging pieces. And then the opposite is true. If you're winning, you want to trade off the pieces and avoid pawn exchanges. That way you can promote your extra pawn in the end, and use your king to help promote that pawn. Anyway, that's what happened in the game here. So we had, let me go back here. After rook to f7, blocking the check, my opponent captures. And so that is a mistake. The computer says at that point now, after capture here, white is behind 3 pawns worth of material, even though he's actually only behind by 1 pawn. But that extra pawn really makes a difference. So if you go into a pawn-only endgame, make sure that you know that you have an advantage, or that you can hold the game to a draw, especially if you're behind. Now, the game could have gone differently if I had doubled pawns and I wasn't able to make progress, but because I have all the pawns side by side, I have a pawn majority here on the king side. And the basic strategy when you have a pawn majority is to push the unopposed pawn. So I can't do that immediately, or it would just be captured. So at some point, I'm going to have to push this f pawn to back up the e pawn when I push it forward, or bring my king up here maybe to d5 to help push this pawn. So let's take a look at what happened in the game. So already at this point, it looks like black should be winning unless a blunder is made or a mistake. So my opponent plays correctly by bringing his king into the center, towards the center of the board, to get that king in on the action, which is very important in endgames. So here I didn't play the best move, I played a good move. My thought here was to go ahead and push this forward. That way my opponent couldn't just play b4 and block my pawns from making progress. But the computer says instead I should have just marched my king up into the center of the board. So my opponent plays c3, which is an excellent move. Why did he play this? Maybe to help control some of the center of the board, but maybe to reinforce a b4 pawn push. So I just start to continue with this plan of marching the king into the center, although the computer prefers f5, which would help me push this unopposed e-pawn. So my opponent makes an excellent move, pushing his king closer to the center of the board in the action, but it looks like b3 was preferred. All right, so I finally get my king into the center, but now I can't push this pawn forward or it'll just be captured. So I need to push my f pawn. And so my opponent just moves his king to the side, but once again the computer would like this b3 pawn move to be played. All right, so now since my opponent's king has moved to d3, I just decide to push this c pawn up, gaining space, attacking the king, and taking away one of his squares that his king can operate from in the center here. So he moves over to e3, which is best, to try and prevent me from pushing my e pawn, and I play f5 here, which is the best move, which will help me push this unopposed e-pawn forward and try and get it moving up, to create a passed pawn here. So now b3 is played, but it is a mistake, which I didn't fully take advantage of. The computer, instead of b3, recommends g3 now as the best move for white. But after this b3 move, I played f4 to further push my opponent's king back out of the center. But it looks like a better move instead of, go back. After b3, a better move would have been to just go ahead and capture, go ahead and capture this b pawn, because white would be forced to recapture, and then black could push his a pawn, and now I could threaten to push this a pawn further, and if it's captured, the b pawn would recapture, and I'd have a passed pawn, an outside passed pawn that would be very dangerous over here. The game continued with, if we go back to b3 being played, I didn't fully take advantage with the best move of capturing here, but instead I attacked the king, which is still a good move, and then the king is forced to retreat, and now I push my unopposed pawn, and it looks like that's a good move, but a5 is preferred by the computer as best. And now we have capture, which is best for white. I recapture, and now a3 is an inaccuracy. Instead, the computer prefers h4, gaining space on the on the king side here. And if I push forward to protect this, then white can exchange off some pawns. And remember, when you're behind in material, you want to exchange off as many pawns as you can, because every pawn that gets exchanged off is one less pawn that could threaten to promote. If we go to a3, which was played, this is an inaccuracy, because now, at some point I'll be able to march my king over and attack this isolated pawn here. E3 is played, so now I have a passed pawn here in the center, and the king will just have to play guard duty, stopping this pawn, keeping an eye on it to prevent it from promoting. And this gives me time to march my king over here, pick this pawn off, and then have another passed pawn it will be impossible to stop both of those. So the game continued with g3 attacking, trying to pick this off, and then get rid of this defender of the e3 pawn. So I play the best move and guard. So then we have another exchange of pawns. And the computer instead prefers pushing this a pawn. But after capture, now we have h3. And so at this point, white is just in trouble because of this passed pawn in the center, and white's ability to go over and attack this a pawn and then march this passed pawn up as well, and white is stuck in the middle just guarding this pawn. So that is the real problem when you're in a pawn only endgame and your opponent has that one extra pawn. The king will be stuck guarding it. Now if rooks were on the board, it would be a totally different game. So the best thing my opponent could have done is avoided exchanging off the last pair of rooks in the end game. So once that happened, black just had the advantage of that extra pawn. All right, so moving on, the game continued with black going after the isolated pawn, capture, and now we have black gaining the opposition here. So the king moves, but now this pawn is under attack as well. And so after side moved, after the king moves to the side, we have capture, and let's see, 2 more moves were played. So my opponent gains the opposition, but now this pawn can threaten to promote with checkmate, and this is where my opponent resigned. And so the game, if it continued, maybe we would have the king having to move here to avoid a mate, but then after the king gaining the opposition, what is available for white? White could move here, but then promotion of the pawn would lead to a checkmate. All right, well, this game just demonstrated how important it is to study endgames, know your endgames in chess, because as we saw in this game, my opponent played quite well in the opening and into the middle game, and material was exchanged down, and I was actually behind a few times, so the balance of the game swung back and forth. So my opponent played quite well in this until the end game. So the moment where the game changed was, let's see, the check here, and then block of the check. So at this point, the game was about even. Black had a slight lead at this point, but the game probably would have, quite possibly ended in a draw with the rook still on the board, even with this extra pawn, because in rook end games, a lot of times you can be up a pawn and the game will still end in a draw, and sometimes even 2 pawns ahead and it still ends in a draw if the king is helping that rook stop the pawns. So the mistake would have been or was capturing here. So once those rooks were exchanged off, well, now because this extra pawn is not a doubled pawn, which would make it harder to promote, well, now this unopposed e-pawn can just try and march up the board, which is what happened in the end. If we look ahead further here, so now we have this passed pawn here on the e file, which allowed black's king to go over here and pick off another pawn because white's king was stuck guarding this passed pawn. All right, well, just remember to study your end games and go over the end games of the great players like Capablanca, who was one of the greatest end game players. You can learn a lot from his games. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for those that haven't already. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions or any requests for what you would like to see in the future. And once again, I'd like to thank all the viewers and subscribers for helping grow this channel. And this was the 400th video for this channel. And the channel is only about 7.5 months old. So thanks everyone. Thank you for your support and have a super chess day.